The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2016.
Hi, I'm Danielle Koester with PBS Charlotte. Welcome to the 2016 general election debate sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. During the next 20 minutes, you'll hear from the two candidates in the North Carolina House of Representatives District 104 race. Questions from today's debate were provided by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The candidates were not given the questions in advance. I'll call on the candidates in random order, and you'll either have 30 seconds or 1 minute to respond. Now, if you'd like to challenge your opponent, raise up your yellow challenge card. You'll have 30 seconds to respond. Each candidate has 3 challenges during this debate, and you'll be allowed to make a 30-second closing statement. Now let's meet the candidates in the North Carolina House of Representatives District 104 race. They are Andy Dulin and Peter Noris.
Hello.
And we'll get started with the first question. For this question, you'll each have 30 seconds to answer. The question, does the legislature have any role to play in diffusing situations like the recent protest and racial tension in Charlotte? Why or why not? And we'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you very much. And it's nice to be here with you in the League of Women Voters today. It turns out they do have a bit of a role, and the state legislature run by the governor did try to come in recently during the unrest and deliver and help with the National Guard. Unfortunately, that help was brought and accepted a day late, and I think that could have made a difference on the second night of unrest. We also have a very good ability with the state. Thank you. I've hit my stop button.
And thank you, Mr. Dulin. Mr. Norris, your response.
I think that local problems like this should be left in the hands of local officials. Bringing the National Guard in, while it might have appeared to ease tensions, actually inflamed tensions among the crowd. No one likes to be confronted by riot police in their own hometown.
And a challenge? Go ahead.
Thank you. I disagree with that some. The city of Charlotte, led ably by our Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, had it under control until they lost control. The National Guard came in, and that second night, you could actually see the protesters hugging the National Guard, hugging the police officers. And I think it helped deter some of the unrest.
And thank you, Mr. Dulin. We'll move on to the second question, and you'll each have 30 seconds to answer. Where do you stand on House Bill 972, enacted by the legislature to prohibit release of body cam videos without a court order? And we'll start with you, Mr. Norris.
I believe that 972 should be modified so that when there's a shooting and a death, release of all the film should be available within a week at the outside. This kind of situation arises much too often in the United States, and we need to do what we can to reduce the incidence of this kind of event.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. And your response, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you. The idea of 972 was really to protect those folks that are family members and involved in the shooting, however tragic it might be. In some cases, those videos and the sight of something that would happen so horrifically to someone would be very bad for the family as they're going through their grieving process. 972 was there to protect folks, and I believe should stay mostly as intact.
Thank you. This is a follow-up question to the previous question. And the question is, do you think police officers should be required to turn on body cameras? You'll each have 30 seconds for your response. We'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Yes, quite frankly, I was on the city council when we started the body camera activities, and I would assume that they would be on much the same way as a dashboard camera is on when the police lights are on the car. But it would be interesting to see. I really didn't know that they weren't on all the time, and it's fine with me because the body cameras are there as much to protect the police officer and their actions as it is the residents.
Thank you. And Mr. Norris, your response?
Well, here's a case where I agree with Mr. Dulin. I think that every officer should have a body cam on. It should be on full time, and it should be attached securely enough so we don't have problems with them falling off.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. For this next question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. The question is, even though the state constitution gives the legislature the power to overrule local ordinances, are they abusing that power with recent actions? Please explain your answer. And we'll start with you, Mr. Norris.
Yes, I do believe they're abusing the power. There's a huge difference between urban North Carolina and rural North Carolina, and I think that it's an instance where this is happening across the country, and cities should be allowed to manage their own affairs according to the will of their voters.
Thank you. And your response, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you. Going back to 1775, North Carolina has been led by the Constitution, and it's handled it very well up until, in some cases, the HB2 is an area that we will talk about later, I'm sure. The Charlotte Airport is an area that you have some dichotomy against state overruling something that's going on in the city and in the communities. So I think generally the legislature does have the power, the sovereign power over the cities, and there's a give and take there.
Yes, you'd like to challenge?
Well, Mr. Dulin's right. There's absolutely no doubt that the state does have the legal authority to do this. I question whether or not they should be using that authority as much as they have in the last 2 years.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. Would you support an independent commissioned redistricting legislative and congressional districts? Why or why not? You'll each have 30 seconds for your response. And we'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Well, that's an interesting question because for 140 years while the Democrats were in power, the Republicans always said we needed to have an independent look at what's going on. Now the Republicans are in power and the Democrats are saying we need to have an independent investigation. Well, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I would, as a new legislator up there, I would look forward to having a say as in the meetings and in the caucus as to what it can do to make things even out some in the communities and in the state.
Thank you. And Mr. Norris, your response?
Well, it's the position of the North Carolina Democratic Party that we should have an independent redistricting process. And I'd like to point out that just in the last 3 months, we've had 2 cases where laws passed by the Republican majority in the NCGA have been declared unconstitutional on this very question. I don't believe that ever happened with the Democrats in power.
Thank you. The next question. Citizens demand tax cuts, but also demand better education, health care, roads, technology improvement, etc. How do you balance these conflicting demands? We'll start with you, Mr. Norris.
Right now, tax collections as a percentage of gross domestic product in North Carolina are down 20% compared to the level that they have been at very consistently for a long period. This is why we're running into problems funding education and police properly. Tax cuts are great, everybody loves them, but we need to have taxes at an appropriate level so we can fund things the way they need to be funded.
Thank you. And your response, Mr. Dulin?
Well, it turns out that the median household income since 2013 is #1 in the U.S. It's double the national growth. Because of that, we've been able to lower taxes. As a matter of fact, the personal income taxes, 7.75% down to 5.5%. It's bringing in actually more revenue, and because of that, we've been able to have a surplus of $500 million since 2013, as opposed to a $1 billion deficit.
Yes, go ahead and challenge.
Well, I'd also like to point out that the population of the state in the last 10 years has grown 15%. And to claim credit for the growth in the North Carolina economy due to a tax cut in North Carolina, when the whole country has been coming out of the worst recession since the 30s, is, I think, stretching the point a little.
And you'd like to challenge?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it turns out that we're in the mess we were up until 2010 when the Republicans took over, and then 2012 when Governor McCrory took over. You guys ran the place for 140 years. That's 14 decades of Democratic control. We've done a great job, and I look forward to helping continuing the recovery.
Thank you. And just so you're both aware, you each have one challenge left for the debate. Moving on to the next question. Do you favor the establishment of a dedicated state funding source for the North Carolina Housing Trust Fund? You'll each have 30 seconds. And we'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you. That's an issue that I know well from my 8 years on the Charlotte City Council. And really, that's a local issue. The City Council works hard on affordable housing, on housing for folks that are bringing themselves up. Charlotte's done a good job of not only helping people up, but reaching down and helping them pull up themselves and pull up their bootstraps and to continue. I think that's more of a local issue. If you start a housing trust fund on the state level, you have to take that funding out of another source, and I don't know if that money is there. Mr.
Noris?
The Housing Trust Fund is one approach to the affordable housing problem that we have. I think a better approach, an approach that would be more targeted to the areas that need it, is to allow cities to set their own minimum wage. That can bring the minimum wage allowed in an urban area where rents are more expensive up to a level that allows people to afford housing.
The next question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. Does it make sense not to expand Medicaid when North Carolina loses federal tax dollars, health insurance coverage for more people, and more jobs in the health industry? Explain. We'll start with you, Mr. Noris.
I think it's bordering on immoral that we don't expand Medicaid coverage to the 500,000 people in North Carolina that don't have it. Not only are we paying the taxes that would support the Medicaid expansion anyway already, when these people finally do get severely ill and go to the hospital, we still have to pay for their health care. It's much better to take care of the problem with insurance up front before they get sick.
Thank you. And your response, Mr. Dulin.
That issue has something to do with, though, the Republicans coming into power in 2010 and 2012 with us getting the House in order. We were billions of dollars in debt under former leadership by Governor Perdue and Governor Easley. And now we've finally been able to get our house in order. Turns out if you don't have things in order at home, you can't go out and help folks in the future. And I think you'll see a turn in a lot of different ways. Housing might be one from the last question as times move forward, but I think you have to get your house in order first.
Thank you. For the next question, again, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. Would you reinstate the North Carolina refundable earned income tax credit to give working families a tax break and thus a boost to the local economy? Why or why not? We'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you. It turns out that I think we're moving in the right direction with the corporate income tax coming down, the personal income tax coming down. There's been a lot of, at the national level, there's been a lot of discussion lately on personal income taxes and taxes paid. The income tax credit, it's there now. If people can take advantage of that, that's fine. But we'll have to take a good look at it, and there'll be a change of leadership, both in as new members, old members leave and new members come in. I'm really looking forward to being a part of that.
Thank you. Your response, Mr. Noris.
Well, this comes back to the fact that the recovery has been very uneven. Although people at the very top have done very well, we still have a huge problem with poverty in this country and people not having the financial means to take care of themselves. Short of major changes, I believe we should reinstate the earned income tax credit immediately.
And the next question, what type of state plan is needed to ensure water quality and supply in the long term, considering recent coal ash spills, droughts, flooding, conflicting regulations, etc.? You'll have 30 seconds to respond. We'll start with you, Mr. Noris.
Well, the first thing we can do is North Carolina has to address the fact that climate change is real and it's happening now. And this is going to place enormous stresses upon all our environmental concerns, particularly when it comes to water quality. The coal ash problem needs to be dealt with immediately, and this is something that is going to require a lot of thought. But as long as we continue to deny climate change, we're not going to be able to address the problem adequately.
Mr. Dulin?
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to use my last challenge card for that, because I do disagree. The climate change deal, we can go on and on about that. The coal ash issue is being addressed. It's in the papers every day. And I will admit that at this point I'm not a coal ash expert, but I will be when I get to the state legislature. The water quality, let's think about the water quality of those poor folks down in eastern North Carolina that are getting flooded out. And some of those sewer problems that are going through, the poor folks at East Carolina University literally have been thrown out of their town for at least a week.
Thank you, Mr. Dulin. And the last question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond, is who are you supporting for president? We'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you. I'm supporting Donald Trump. Trump was not my first pick, but as the field waned a little bit, I've come to like him. I've come to like his feistiness. I've come to like the way that he goes about his business. I love, as Hillary Clinton said the other day, I love his family. They are, I think, a stand-up American family. They're hardworking. They stay together. And I like the way that he's going to be able to use his experience. And listen, he's used the tax codes to his advantage, but I think that's a good thing as he moves forward because he knows how it works and he's got real-world experience, not 30 years worth of government on the dole.
And Mr. Noris, your response?
Well, I support Hillary Clinton. I think that instead of spending 30 years going in and out of bankruptcy, stiffing small business people on the amounts that they were owed, Hillary Clinton has a 30-year history of working for children, working for families, working for the United States and the State Department. I'm with Hillary all the way. We are stronger together.
And go ahead and challenge.
Thank you. It turns out that until Hillary won, though, I believe you were a Bernie Sanders supporter from the very get-go. Mm-hmm. And socialism is not the way to go for our country. As Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. And so Hillary Clinton is more of that same. And I believe if she gets elected, or Bernie Sanders had gotten elected, we would have had your socialist crowd running the show.
Go ahead and challenge.
Oh, Andy, I love that you walked into that one. Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. He's a socialist Democrat. There's a big difference, and if you don't understand that, there's not much I can do about that. I actually was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I believed in very many of the Bernie Sanders program and philosophies. However, we had a hard-fought campaign. They were both good candidates. Hillary Clinton won, and I'm with Hillary. I'm with her.
Thank you. It's now time for a closing statement. You'll each have 30 seconds, and we'll start with you, Mr. Dulin.
Thank you very much for having us today. I'm very excited about North Carolina House District 104. I've met hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of you as I've walked your neighborhoods, as I've communicated with you over the phone, and I look forward to continuing that through the election. One of the things I really miss about my 8 good years on the Charlotte City Council from 2005 to 2013 was the service. I really miss folks calling me and saying, Andy, can you help me with this issue or that issue? And my answer was always, yes, I can. And so I'm looking forward to going to Raleigh and helping folks with the service part of what helps their families.
Thank you, Mr. Dulin. And Mr. Noris, your closing statement.
The governor and the legislature are out of touch. They're passing unconstitutional laws in defiance of their oaths of office. The party of Trump, McCrory, and Dulin is willing to do anything to stay in power. A good state builds diversity through strength. I'll work for good-paying jobs with clean energy, expanding Medicaid, building teacher salaries and per-pupil expenditures to a national average, and fixing the coal ash problem. I'm Peter Noris, and I appreciate your support for the North Carolina House.
Thank you, Mr. Noris. Once again, the 2 candidates in the North Carolina House of Representatives District 104 race are Andy Dulin and Peter Noris. Thank you both for taking part in this debate. For more information about the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, visit goleaguego.org. And for more information about the candidates, visit vote411.org. A quick reminder for Mecklenburg County voters, early voting begins Thursday, October 20th. The general election is Tuesday, October 8th. Polls will be open from 6:30 in the morning until 7:30 in the evening. I'm Danielle Koser. Thanks for watching PBS Charlotte.